We at Goddess Garden Book Chat are so glad that you came back as we go on this journey through the book challenge of 28 books, 28 days. Hi, friends, this is 11 Goddess, and welcome back to the Goddess Garden Book Chat. We're on book 12, we're in the thick of things, and I thought it was poignant to insert ZORA Neale Hurston here. She is one of my favorite authors. I have had such eye opening experiences about the culture and history and dialect that existed years ago and traditions lost within my culture. And I'm so thankful that she chose to become a writer, that she chose to share these stories, and that we as a collective group of readers get to enjoy these stories. So I hope you enjoy Barracoon. Though it is a painful and harsh look at a reality, it is history. It is a cultural history. It is an American and African history. And it's important that we understand the past so that we are not doomed to repeat it. This book is not a work of fiction, and I think it is brilliantly done by a brilliant author. And I hope you have a good time listening.
GGBC reading challenge transforming February's dreams. Live as a Sankofa bird where past and future gleam. Every story a chance to grow from reflection.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty powerful today.
Definitely powerful.
We're taking a look at Barracoon.
By ZORA Neale Hurston.
Exactly. Book number 12 in the book challenge. Congrats to all of you keeping up, by the way.
Yeah, you're really making some progress.
Now, for this deep dive, we're using this awesome review as our guide. And let me tell you, there are some real hidden gems in here about the transatlantic slave trade that you don't usually see.
Yeah, some really eye-opening stuff. Barracoon is unique because it zooms in on Cudjo Lewis, the last known survivor of that awful journey.
Wow, the last known survivor.
Yep, his story, as told by Hurston, it gives us this first-hand look that's just incredibly moving, and it also really enlightening.
It's like a window into history we don't often get. And the review really highlights Hurston's brilliance as a storyteller. She doesn't just retell Cudjo's experiences, she makes him come alive on the page.
Right. One of the most striking things is how Hurston uses Cudjo's actual way of speaking, his vernacular. It's unfiltered, raw, and authentic. You know, it's pretty radical for the time, especially for a Black author.
Yeah, to think about that, back then there was so much pressure for Black authors to conform to white literary standards. But Hurston, she chose to honor Cudjo's voice. And in a way, it's like she's honoring African oral traditions too, right?
Totally. It's like a time capsule preserving not just the events, but the rhythm and the sound of his speech. In the review, they mention how Cudjo often uses this word barracoon.
Barracoon?
Yeah, it's probably a word a lot of people haven't heard before.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that. What exactly was a barracoon?
Well, think of it like a holding pen, a really awful one. They were these cramped, filthy spaces where enslaved Africans were imprisoned before being forced onto the slave ships. Places of just unimaginable suffering. Dehumanizing is really the only word for it.
Ugh, barracoon. Just saying it out loud sends shivers down my spine. The review's description of Cudjo's time in one is absolutely heartbreaking. Just the thought of so many people crammed into these spaces, stripped of their dignity and facing such a terrifying unknown.
It's a powerful reminder of the cruelty that was at the core of this whole transatlantic slave trade. Barracoon doesn't hold back in showing these horrors. Cudjo talks about seeing people die from disease, from just giving up hope, families torn apart, the constant fear hanging over everyone.
It's hard to imagine how anyone could survive that and come out the other side with any bit of their humanity intact.
Right, but that's what's remarkable about Cudjo. Even in the face of all that suffering, there are these flickers of resilience, hope, even moments of humor that Hurston manages to capture so beautifully.
It's like finding a glimmer of light in the darkest place imaginable. And this is where those hidden gems you were talking about earlier start to come out, because this book goes beyond the horrors of the slave trade itself. It reveals the lasting impact it had on Africa.
Absolutely. Cudjo's story moves beyond just his personal suffering and shows these often overlooked consequences for the entire continent. The review talks about how his village in Africa, once full of life, was totally devastated by slave raids.
It wasn't just about the people taken, right? It was
Yeah.
about the effects on the communities they were ripped from, the families shattered, the traditions lost.
Exactly. Cudjo talks about losing skilled people, artisans, farmers, the erosion of their cultural practices. and this deep distrust that was planted between neighboring villages. Sometimes they were even turned against each other by the slave traders, to capture and sell their own people. Well, these are wounds that run deep and still affect Africa today.
Yeah, it's a harsh truth. The effects of that whole transatlantic slave trade go way beyond just the lives lost. It was a straight-up attack on African societies as a whole, and you can still see the scars today.
It's crazy. Reading this review, I realized I never really thought about it that way. Like you said, a hidden gem that Barracoon reveals. It's one of those things that gets overshadowed by the immediate tragedy, but it's essential to understanding the full weight of it, the legacy of the slave trade. And Hurston's choice to let Cudjo tell his story in his own words, that makes it all the more powerful.
It's that rawness, that authenticity that hits you so hard. Like you're sitting right there with Cudjo, listening to him. Speaking of listening, the review mentions the audiobook, read by Robin Miles. They couldn't say enough good things about it. Have you had a chance to listen to it?
Oh yeah, I have. It's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. Miles just brings Cudjo's voice to life. The nuances of his speech, the emotion in his stories, even the subtle humor that comes through in the darkest parts, it's amazing.
Wow. It sounds like a truly immersive experience. I might have to check that out.
Yeah.
But before we get too sidetracked by the audiobook, there's something else the review mentions that's really interesting. Barracoon wasn't actually published until 2018, decades after Hurston finished it.
Oh yeah, that's right. The book got rejected over and over, and it's only recently that it finally made it out to readers. The review suggests a couple of reasons for the delay, and they're really thought-provoking.
What sort of reasons?
Well, one idea is that publishers back then just weren't ready for such a raw and real account of slavery, especially from a Black author using the language of a formerly enslaved person.
Yeah, I can see that. Times were different. And how people viewed race and storytelling back then was completely different.
For sure. The review also suggests that Hurston's focus on the African side of things, the impact on communities and the long-term effects, that might have made publishers uncomfortable.
It's like they wanted to keep the focus on the individual suffering without acknowledging the larger systemic effects of the slave trade.
Possibly. And of course, we can't forget about the challenges Hurston faced as a Black female author.
True, she was a pioneer in so many ways, but even pioneers face obstacles, especially when dealing with difficult and controversial topics.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's sad that Barracoon sat unpublished for so long, but its release now feels even more significant. Like Cudjo's story and the stories of countless others who endured the horrors of the slave trade finally found its place in history.
It reminds you that even when stories get suppressed or delayed, they find a way to come out eventually. The truth has a way of doing that.
It really does. And it connects to one of the most important things about Barracoon, the way it makes you think about how we remember and learn from the past. The review uses the phrase never forget, but it challenges you to go beyond just acknowledging the awful things that happened.
You mean to really try to understand the depth of the impact and what it means for us now and in the future?
Exactly. Barracoon isn't just a history lesson, it's a call to action. It makes you confront uncomfortable truths, examine your own biases, and work towards a more just world.
That really resonates with me as we're talking about this book. You're now 12 books deep into the book challenge, and I'm curious, how do you feel Barracoon fits into the bigger picture of what you've been reading?
That's a good question. I think Barracoon stands out because it offers such a personal and visceral perspective on an event that we often only see through statistics and general accounts. Hearing Cudjo's story in his own words, with all its rawness and authenticity, makes the impact of the transatlantic slave trade so much more real and immediate.
Yeah, I get that. It's one thing to read about the slave trade in a textbook, but it's a completely different experience to hear from someone who actually lived through it.
Right, and it's not just about understanding the facts, it's about connecting with the human stories behind them. That's what makes Barracoon so powerful and thought-provoking. It reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of dates and events, it's made up of individual lives and experiences that continue to shape our world today.
That's a perfect point to bring up something else I wanted to touch on. The review really emphasizes Hurston's brilliance in capturing Cudjo's voice and making his story come alive. It's like she stepped aside and let him tell his truth.
And that's what makes her storytelling so incredible. By keeping Cudjo's way of speaking, she honors his individuality and gives us this glimpse into a world that we might have otherwise lost to history.
It's like she created this time capsule, capturing not only the events, but the essence of his experience. And it reminds us that history is made up of these individual stories, each one a thread in the larger tapestry of human experience.
Yeah, and by listening to those individual stories, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of history. We move beyond the big picture and connect with the human heart of it all.
And that connection makes history so much more real and meaningful. It's not just some abstract thing in a textbook. It's about real people and their lives.
Yeah, exactly. And Barracoon really drives that home.
It does. Thinking about all these books you've read for the book challenge, has Barracoon changed how you think about history or storytelling?
It really has. What stood out to me the most was Hurston's decision to keep Cudjo's unique way of speaking. It wasn't just about his dialect. It felt like a way of respecting his voice, respecting these rich African oral traditions.
The review touched on that too. By using his vernacular, Hurston kind of breaks the mold of traditional storytelling, where everything's formal and objective.
Exactly. It's like she's saying, hey, Cudjo's story needs to be told in his own way without anyone else trying to polish it up. And that creates this really powerful, intimate connection between Cudjo and the reader.
Yeah, like we're sitting with him, hearing his story firsthand. And through his words, we learn so much, not just about his life, but about the whole cultural and historical context.
And that's what makes Barracoon so important to the whole conversation about history, race, and identity. It's a story that people need to hear. And the way Hurston tells it, well, it'll stick with readers for a long time.
For sure. So as you continue on your book challenge journey, I hope Cudjo's story stays with you too. Let it be a reminder that history is more than just facts and dates. It's about the lives of real people. And those stories, they can really change how we see the world.
They can. And don't ever underestimate how powerful a single story can be. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching for those hidden gems that help us understand ourselves and the world a little bit better.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into Barracoon. We hope you enjoyed it and that it got you thinking. Until next time, happy reading.
Learning to last through pages that whisper lessons untold. God is God in room, stories unfold. Reflections of strength like rivers flow. In books we rise, that our spirits glow. GGBC reading challenge transforming February's dreams. Live as a Sankofa bird, where past and future gleam. Turn back the pages, history's light.